Now, in doing my research for this series, which mainly involved reading, or in some cases rereading, articles from the past 5 to 6 years, articles that related to the Star Wars sequel trilogy, one thing quickly became very clear. A lot of people had a lot of things to say about The Last Jedi, and or the, shall we say, mixed fan reaction to it. And actually, the number of Star Wars or sequel trilogy related articles that came out between the release of that movie, Episode 8, and the release of The Rise of Skywalker seems to be far more than the total number of articles written about these movies at all other times combined, and especially here after the fact. No one's talked about The Rise of Skywalker all that much in comparison. I mean, here we are 7 months after the fact, and you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone saying anything, good or bad, about that movie, and it's been that way for months now, since shortly after the movie came out. Whereas with The Last Jedi, the conversation never stopped or even slowed down. And sure, part of the reason for that is we had another movie coming up yet, whereas with The Rise of Skywalker, that's it, that's the end of the sequel trilogy. But the talk after The Last Jedi wasn't about what was to come, it was about what had happened. And before going on, let me just very quickly recap the first 2 parts of the series, and links to them will be in the description below if you want to check them out, assuming you haven't already. Anyway, before The Force Awakens, there was quite simply harmony in the fanbase. Most fans, not all, some of course had their doubts about Disney, were excited for the upcoming sequel trilogy, and no one was writing articles saying anything bad about the fanbase. No one was talking about any sort of racist and or sexist section within it. No one was really saying there was anything toxic about the Star Wars fans, even though the prequels had divided the fandom a decade earlier. But the thing with that is, most critics didn't like the prequels, and hence they sided with the quote-unquote haters in that case. Not to mention, as I've said elsewhere, there was no real story there for them. Nerds bickering over the content and quality of movies doesn't really sell. It doesn't get people to click on your articles, or more likely at the time, buy your magazines or your newspapers. Immediately after The Force Awakens came out, however, things began to change. A lot of articles started to pop up about how Rey was a feminist icon, while simultaneously many fans questioned if Rey was maybe too powerful too soon, if she was a Mary Sue type character. And though, by and large, the talk after Episode 7 was still all theory related, who is Snoke, who are Rey's parents, and so on, the first shots in a much larger war to come had been fired. You had the people who were claiming that or writing about how Rey was a real-world icon, again a feminist symbol, against those who, frankly, didn't give a damn what she meant in the real world, and only cared about who she is in story or in universe. You had 2 groups of people who looked at Star Wars, or at these movies, in 2 completely different ways, or as 2 completely different things. One that saw it as a platform to address real-world issues, and one who saw it as a fictional, far away galaxy that they loved for the stories they got to experience there. And if the movies had been universally or nearly universally accepted as good or even great among the fanbase, fans really wouldn't have cared if someone wanted to put Rey on a pedestal and hail her as an icon. They likely would have been doing that themselves. And if the fans had loved the movies and the character of Rey, those who care more about what she represents in the real world would have no reason to take issue with the fans. But the problem is, or was, many fans, despite overwhelming critical praise for The Last Jedi, simply did not like the movie and didn't think Rey was a great character. And I feel like I really need to emphasize or reiterate that they didn't think Rey was a great character. For the vast majority of fans, that's the only thing that mattered, the character itself, not the gender or anything else for that matter. But you see, the other side really didn't care about how Rey fit into the story. In fact, many articles praised the fact that Rey was so great at everything and that she was so capable. That's actually what they loved about her. Problem is, that's what a lot of fans didn't like about her. They felt she needed to struggle a bit more, to taste a true bitter defeat before we could relish in victory alongside her at the end of the story. Because it's the struggle that tends to endear characters to us, makes us empathize with them. Not only is a story about someone who easily succeeds at everything usually unrealistic and boring, but it gives us nothing to root for. I mean, there's a reason why people tend to always cheer for the underdog. They love a story of someone overcoming incredible odds, because it gives us hope that we, too, in our own lives can overcome our struggles and our own overwhelming odds. A lot of people love characters because they can see themselves in them via the hard times, and it often doesn't matter if they're the same race, gender, or even the same species when it comes to Star Wars. And so, contrary to the belief of some, fans aren't against female characters in Star Wars, not at all. They're just against bad characters in Star Wars, period. And right or wrong, a lot of fans think Rey is a bad character. And yes, we can certainly debate how true that is or isn't, but the simple fact is, many feel that she just isn't a good character. And if we again look back at the prequels, many thought Anakin Skywalker was also a bad character, or that Hayden Christensen did a poor job of portraying him. That guy got a lot of flack back in the day, as did the prequels in general, from fans and media alike. And yet that's all it ever was. No one ever read more into it than that, because there was never anything more to it than just some fans being unhappy with the films. Hell, you'd laugh at me if I suggested that people were harsh towards Hayden Christensen or George Lucas because they were white men. That'd be a ridiculous statement to make. Yet with Rey, so many people are willing to make the jump. They're willing to say Star Wars fans hate women or don't want them in Star Wars in general because they didn't like Rey. But Anakin and or Hayden Christensen, and again George Lucas himself, in that case they just disliked them for the sake of the movies, and everyone just shrugged and accepted that answer. And I mean, think about it. If some fans are willing to savagely attack the creator of the whole damn thing, what makes you think they wouldn't go after one bad character that happens to be a female? Because, for better or worse, Star Wars fans are passionate. They won't hold back when they love it, and they won't hold back when they don't love it. And along those same lines, most fans only care about Star Wars itself, not anything else around it. So again, they weren't going to hold back attacking Rey, just like they didn't hold back from attacking Hayden, George Lucas, and others in the past. But unfortunately, in this case, the hate for Rey, the character, got conflated, intentionally or not, with hate for women in general by the other side, a rejection of the message by those who only care about what she represents in the real world, who love her simply for being a powerful young woman in a story. And I really do hate to even call them the other side, because no one's against women in Star Wars. There shouldn't be sides when it comes to this issue. And even though I truly believe race and gender tend to be irrelevant when it comes to a great character, if a character like Rey somehow allows for young girls, or hell, even old women, to get more into science fiction or fantasy, if it begins to destroy any sort of stigma around them being just for boys, well then that's great. My fiance, who loves all things geek, if you will, knows what it's like to grow up with others looking at you as different for embracing these things. And almost always she'll tell you it came from other girls. And though you're free to completely disagree with anything I'm saying here, I've spoken to some women who feel like Rey is a disservice to that cause, to destroying the stigma around girls not being able to like these things. They too think she was a poor character and didn't relate well to her and wanted to see a better, more well thought out female character in a franchise like Star Wars. Because I think we can all agree that Star Wars, the movies, had been lacking in female characters overall. Now, I'm not saying there haven't been some truly great ones in there, because there has, especially if we dip into the EU, where there are many of them. And the strange thing is, those who read the EU could be considered the most diehard of fans, perhaps, yet never once have I heard a single complaint about too many female characters in there. Now, why is that? Well, because they were always characters meant to serve the story before anything else, and oftentimes, usually even, they were great characters. And so again, if we rewind the clock back to before this sequel trilogy started, there was no one upset that the main character was going to be a woman. Virtually everybody was on board with that, because no one was or is today against women in Star Wars. And look, the backlash to The Last Jedi is complicated. There are a lot of factors to take into account, and it's going to take a video or two to cover them all. But one of the reasons it was disliked so much is not because women were given prominent roles. Anyone who makes that claim has to ignore history or reshape it to fit their own narrative. They have to ignore the reaction to the prequels, the treatment of some of the actors because of those movies, and even of George Lucas himself. They have to ignore that there already were beloved female characters in the franchise, and a great many more if we look beyond just the movies. They have to ignore that there was no backlash against Rey or a female lead before the trilogy started. And many who run with this idea that some Star Wars fans are sexist or that a sizable portion of the fanbase is, know exactly what they're doing. They're using this as a platform to push their larger message. I mean, they haven't even tried to hide that fact from the start, when they again went out of their way to praise her for being so strong and called her a feminist icon after the first movie. They've made it clear from the word go it's not about the character, it's about their cause. And that cause is something detached from just helping allow more girls or women enjoy these genres, which again, no one is against. And of course, when it comes to the media, and unlike with the prequels, there's an interesting story here that will sell. people will click on an article that outlines how there is a sexist infestation in the Star Wars fanbase, and not only that, but they know it will provoke. They know it will cause a response. And the other side responding to their initial claims will be yet another story. Anyone daring to speak up against them, to continue to say something against Rey after they've proven this is a gender issue, not an issue about a fictional story, can and will then be villainized. Another story can then be written, more clicks on their articles can be received, and more money for them. And I'm certainly not saying there aren't two sides to this coin, that there isn't a vicious circle here where a lot of people are profiting, or that I myself haven't been a part of it in any way. And I sometimes wonder if there isn't some sort of unspoken and actually maybe somewhat unrecognized agreement in place. Because every time one side in the SJW versus the anti-SJW war says something crazy that is utterly ridiculous or makes some sort of bold claim, it prompts the other side to make a response. Hell, it allows them to make a response. And when that response comes, the original side responds back, and it goes on and on and on. And it gets to the point where you have to ask, what good is actually finding or working towards a solution when you're making money off the conflict? Why would anyone profiting from a war want to see it end? It reminds me of that saying, there's no money in the cure, only in the treatment. Anyway, to wrap this part up, again, a look at the reaction to the prequels. Look at how fans then weren't afraid to express themselves in regards to those movies and those who made them. So let's stop making the assumption or believing it that for the vast majority of fans who didn't like The Last Jedi or Rey, that it has anything to do with more than not liking a movie. For them, it's never been a war against women. It's always been a war, in their eyes, to save Star Wars. Well, that's all I've got for this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think about any or all of what I had to say here, or if you haven't seen them, head down to the description below and check out the other parts in this series. Either way, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.